So this is a review of pronouns. Pronouns are words in English like I, you, he, we, y'all, and they. You learned the Latin word for I in 6th grade. It's ego. You learned you in 6th grade as well. It's tu. This year we learned we, which is nos, and y'all, which is vos. These are all nominative forms, the subject form of the pronoun. So when it's doing the verb, if ego is the subject, the verb ends in an O, canto, ego canto, I sing. Tu, cantas, the verb ends in an S because tu, or you, is the subject. Nos cantamos, we are singing, and vos cantatis. Vos means y'all, and the ending on the verb is tis. Nos means we, and the ending on the verb is mus. In Latin, there are words for he and they, the pronoun forms, he, she, or it, and they. They're complicated and messy, and we'll save those for next year. Right now, you only need to worry about I, you, we, and y'all. So right now, you already know the nominative forms of those pronouns. But pronouns work like nouns, so they need to be able to be nominative, dative, or accusative like nouns can be. If they're the subject, they would be nominative. I like chocolate. You see the dog. I and you would be nominative in those sentences. Pronouns can, like nouns can, be an indirect object, and then they would need to be dative. Brian gave candy to me. Brian gave candy to you. Brian gave candy to us. Brian gave candy to y'all. In each of those, the to me, to you, to us, to y'all would be an indirect object, and therefore that pronoun would need to be dative. Pronouns, like nouns, can also be direct objects. Brian sees who or what? Me. Me is the direct object. It needs to be accusative. Brian sees you. You is the direct object. It needs to be accusative. Brian sees us. Brian sees y'all. So pronouns can be nominative subjects, dative indirect objects, or accusative direct objects. Special note here, pronouns can also be a dative direct object of a special verb. That doesn't change just because it's a pronoun. They're just like regular nouns. So now you need to know what these pronouns look like when they're not nominative. You know those, ego, tu, nos, and vos, but what do they look like when they're dative or when they're accusative? And here's your little chart. I, in the nominative, is ego. If you give something to me, that's dative, mihi. If you do something like you see me or hug me, me would be accusative. You is tu when it's nominative. If somebody gives something to you, that's dative, that's tibi. If somebody hugs you or kicks you or finds you or sees you, that would be accusative, that's te. The nice little rhyme there is ego mihi me tu tibi te, ego mihi me tu tibi te. That way you don't actually have to memorize it. It's just an annoying rhyme that you can't forget no matter how hard you try. Nos and vos are also pronouns. Nos is nominative. The dative, if somebody gives something to us, is nobis. Vos is nominative. If somebody gives something to you guys, it would be vobis. Nobis, vobis. At least they look alike. It's a little less to have to memorize. The nice thing and annoying thing is that the accusatives of nos and vos are nos and vos. They're the same form. And yes, it can be confusing when you see it in a sentence, but you have to use common sense and figure out, just like when you see es on the end of a third declension noun, you have to think, is that going to be a subject or is it going to be a direct object? What's going on in the sentence? So sometimes you do have to puzzle that out, and that's a little frustrating. Sorry about that. Here are some examples in English and in Latin of I as the nominative. I see the dog. Ego canem video. I as the dative. The girl carries food to me. Puella mihi kibum portat. Mihi, to me. In the accusative, the dog sees who or what? Me. Canis me videt. For the pronoun you see the dog. Tu canem vides. For the dative, the girl carries food to you. Puella tibi kibum portat. And then the dog sees who or what? Accusative, you. Canis te videt. So, ego mihi me, tu tibi te. And then we, as a subject, we see the dog. Nos canem videmos. We, as a dative indirect object, the girl brings food to us. Puella nobis cibum portat. We, as a direct object, the dog sees who or what? Us. Canis nos videt. I know it's irritating that nos here is a nominative and here it's an accusative. One way to check that, if nos is the subject, what should the verb end in? Mus. Here's a nos. Does the verb end in mus? No. So this nos cannot be your subject. It must be accusative. Look at vos. Y'all see the dog. Vos canem videtis. The girl brings food to y'all or for y'all. Puella vobis cibum portat. And the dog sees y'all. Canis vos videt. Same thing as nos. Vos here is accusative. Here it's nominative. If vos is the subject, the verb has to end in tis. Down here, vos can't be the subject because your verb doesn't end in tis. If it's not the subject, it must be the direct object, the accusative form. So these are your pronoun forms. In order to practice them, there is the special verbs practice number 2 in Quia that you could do that hits on some of those forms. They do pop up in some of the other special verbs practices, but it might be a good idea to write out some sentences like I have here, some example practice sentences with the different pronoun forms in English and in Latin, so you're sure you know what case things are and what they look like when they're translated. And then get somebody like me or another student to double check them. Good luck!